This PowerPoint is about eugenics. Let's look at eugenics in the scientific context of the time. This was a very popular movement with a core of research that took Mendel's laws about plants and applied them to inherited human traits. Everything from eye color to whether or not you were a shiftless criminal. Positive eugenics is a moral philosophy that says we can improve humanity by encouraging the most able and the most healthy people to have more children. Negative eugenics is the opposite. Here we cull the population to remove the least able from the breeding population and thereby increase or preserve humanity's fitness. Scientists believed that a lot of the degenerate hereditary characteristics were caused by bad environments. So if you grew up poor or in a bad neighborhood, that's what caused you to be a criminal or to be insane. Social failures, they felt, could be corrected by preventive medicine. Not vaccines or keeping your teeth clean like we think of, but things like sterilization and killing people. Data was collected from insane asylums, prisons, orphanages, and homes for the blind because these were easy populations to collect data from, as well as military recruits because there were so many of them. Let's look at the context of economics and social and political things that were going on. After the Civil War was a very turbulent time for the economy. Industry was rapidly growing, agriculture was being mechanized, people were moving away from the farms and into the cities and couldn't keep up with the adequate housing. Bankruptcies and bank problems caused price fluctuations. Labor unions were becoming militant. There was a series of depressions beginning in 1873, and we have increasing numbers of immigrants from South and East Europe. And on top of this, the birth rate among the upper class, or the good blood people, was declining. Eugenics was popularized by financial support from individuals and foundations. There were societies and associations that began and worked towards eugenics and the principles. They had newsletters and international conferences. This spilled over into the movies, the church sermons, the textbooks in the school biology courses, and university courses as well. When you went to the state fair, there was a Fitter Families contest and billboards stating some Americans are born to be a burden on the rest. And there was a modern 10 commandments that were based on eugenic principles that were published. Scientists studied different physical, emotional, and psychological traits. Everything from eye color, hair color, texture, and pigmentation, color of your skin, what type of skeleton you might have, the length of your arms, etc. Diseases that were frowned on, that were hereditary, such as hemophilia and albinism, or being an albino. Psychiatric disorders were looked at. People who had feeble-minded or were mentally retarded, those with manic depression or schizophrenia. People who were colorblind. On the other hand, they also looked at special abilities like who could draw, write, do music, or even golf. They considered tendencies such as alcoholism, immorality, and shiftlessness, and specifically were looking for people of good blood. Some of the flaws in the research. It's easy to quantify and define physical traits such as what color is your eye, what kind of hair do you have, how tall are you, how big around is your head. Those physical traits are very easy to look at. But when we come to behavioral and mental traits, those are more difficult to define and difficult to measure. Scientists at the time were caught up in reification, which is when you treat a complex trait or behavior as if it was caused by a single thing. For instance, looking at someone who had criminal behavior and deciding it was because they were short, or because they came from Eastern Europe, or because their parents were poor. Those traits and behaviors are complex and stem from multiple causes. Reification is thinking that they are caused by one thing and then measuring to see if that's true. The research was done using very poor survey and statistical methods. Many times the medical records were inadequate. People were self-reporting on things they didn't know about. They were interviewing neighbors to tell them about the person who lives next door, or hearsay at the local pool hall. They believed that if you could quantify it, it must be true. If I can measure it or score it, it must be true. They ignored social and environmental influences in trying to measure these traits, and a lot of the data was collected by untrained observers, so it was either inadequate, inconsistent, or just poor quality. The laws. 1907, Indiana was the first state to have a law for sterilization of people that were looked down upon. Eventually, 33 states put this type of law into effect. In 1914, a man named Laughlin wrote the model eugenical sterilization law, which was then adopted by many places. 1927, we have a court case, Buck versus Bell, that mandated the sterilization of socially inadequate and defective persons. This law has never been overruled and is still in the books. In 1933, the Nazis adopt Laughlin's model law and sterilized more than 350,000 people. We know the history of the medical experiments and things that were done with races and groups of people that the Nazis felt were subpar. The Nazis even awarded Laughlin an honorary degree for his work in the science of racial cleansing. Well, the backlash of what happened was caused by the Nazis, then started coming into America. And in 1935, the Oklahoma law for sterilization of repeat criminals was struck down by the Supreme Court. So the backlash of what happened with the Nazis and eugenics begins to start turning the attitudes toward it. However, the immigration laws still restricted those that were considered unable to take care of themselves. It also controlled for alien contagion or diseases and limited how much cheap foreign labor could come into the country, not only to preserve the pay rates for our American workers, but also to limit the Eastern European area where this cheap foreign labor was coming from, or from China. In 1920, Laughlin testified using data from census and foreign-born persons in jail. He's the one that pushed for these immigration laws where they were controlling the number of Jews, Italians, Chinese, and people from South and Eastern Europe.